If you had asked me a year ago what happiness looked like, I would have pointed at my kitchen on a Sunday morning. Sunlight spilling over the marble countertop. The smell of French roast coffee. My daughter giggling while Brian made pancakes like he actually knew what he was doing. We were a postcard. One of those picture-perfect couples that made people roll their eyes and secretly envious, or so I thought. Chicago had a way of dressing up even the messiest realities in clean lines and architectural beauty. That's what I did for a living. Found order in the chaos of numbers. I was the head accountant at Winford & Company, a respected architecture firm downtown. I liked precision, I liked rules, and I loved the illusion that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and built a life with someone who claimed to love you, things would stay. I married Brian 8 years ago. He was charming in a way that made you forget to ask deeper questions. The kind of man who could sell sand in the desert and make you feel like you got a deal. He worked in luxury real estate and was always networking, at evening mixers or flying out to meet clients. I used to joke that he shook more hands than a politician on election week. It made sense. I had my spreadsheets. He had his suits. We had our daughter, Nora, 5 years into our marriage. She's the one thing Brian couldn't fake. When he held her, something genuine flickered through the practiced lines and photo-ready smiles. Or maybe I was just too hopeful. I wanted our family to work so badly that I airbrushed all the imperfections, but peace built on ignorance is a fragile thing. It was a Thursday afternoon. Dull and routine, when my world began to unravel. I was sorting invoices when I got a call from my bank's fraud department. The woman on the line spoke gently, as if trying not to spook a wild animal. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "we're calling to verify a mortgage loan recently issued under your name, $240,000 for a property on North Halsted." I paused. "Excuse me? Yes, the loan was finalized last week. We just need to confirm a few last details." The pen dropped from my hand. My mouth was dry. "There's been a mistake. I didn't apply for any mortgage. That's not my loan." She hesitated. "Well, the paperwork has your signature. Everything checked out. It's been funded." I don't remember much after that. Just this cold wave rising from the pit of my stomach to the back of my neck. When I got off the phone, I stared at the wall across from my desk like it might offer answers. Instead, it only reflected my disbelief. $240,000. Signed in my name. And I had no idea that night Brian was working late. I watched Nora eat her mac and cheese and tried not to let the fear show on my face. How long had I been living in this carefully curated lie? And what else didn't I know? I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stayed up digging through our documents, trying to find traces, anything that could explain how someone could steal my signature, my identity, my credit, without me even knowing. But it wasn't someone. I used to think betrayal would come like a storm, sudden, violent, and without warning. But it didn't. In real life, it arrives far more quietly, like a tiny crack on a glass surface. At first, just a faint line, barely noticeable. Then day by day, week by week, that crack widens, silently, until the entire pane shatters before you can do anything about it. I had started noticing those cracks long before the call from the bank. I just chose not to pay attention. Brian used to set his phone password to our wedding date. Later, he changed it to a string of random characters. I remember laughing. "What are you hiding?" He just shrugged, kissed my forehead, and said, "You're overthinking it. We used to share one email address for family bills. Lately, he created a personal email account, for work, and every time a message came in, he would flip his phone over immediately." I also noticed his weekend client meetings became more frequent. One time, I offered to book his flight, just like I always did. He smiled and said, "No need, the partner's taking care of it." I froze at the change, but brushed it off, telling myself, "Don't be paranoid, Elena." I even noticed money disappearing from our joint account without clear explanations. Every time I asked, Brian would say it was short-term investment, then skillfully redirect the topic with a hug or a surprise family outing. I had seen every sign. I just didn't want to believe it. Until the night I decided to check his laptop. Brian always kept it close. But that night he left it on the desk before going for a shower. My heart pounded like I was the one doing something wrong. I opened it, typed in the old password, Nora's birthday, and got in. In his inbox, I found the things no one ever wants to see. PDF files of home purchase contracts, bank loan applications, all bearing my name, my signature, except I had never touched any of them. I found a secondary bank account where he'd been transferring money from our joint one, using it to pay for personal projects. And then, the photos. Selfies of Brian with a young brunette woman. Stylish and smiling. They were together in an apartment I recognized, because it was under my name. The one I'd planned to rent out to save for Nora's education. In one of the photos, my SUV, bought after a promotion, was parked behind them. He gave her my car, my apartment, my name, as if I had never existed. I remember not crying. What I felt wasn't pain, it was emptiness. Like falling off a cliff in slow motion. With no scream, just watching everything crumble around me. I quietly copied all the files to a USB. Put the laptop back exactly as it was. Brian stepped out of the shower. Hair still damp. He asked if I wanted tea. I smiled and nodded. That night, I learned something new. The hardest part of betrayal isn't the moment you find out. It's pretending you don't know. But 3 months later, everything crossed the line. Nora got sick. It was a chilly Friday afternoon. She had a high fever, almost 104 degrees Fahrenheit, flushed cheeks and labored breathing. I rushed her to the nearest hospital in a panic. Everything happened so fast. The doctor said it might be a viral infection and she needed IV treatment immediately. I called Brian. No answer. I texted. Called again. 10 times. 20. Still no response. I tried to stay calm for Nora. But inside me, 1,000 needles were piercing. I knew he wasn't in a meeting. Deep down, I knew something was happening. And I was no longer part of his schedule. That evening, once Nora had fallen asleep from exhaustion, I received a message from a coworker, Anna, someone I used to be close with. I don't know if I should send this, but I think you need to see it. It was a photo. Brian, in the same familiar suit, sitting in the lobby of a luxury riverside hotel. His arm was wrapped around a young woman's waist, the same woman from the laptop photos. She was beaming, leaning into him, and Brian looked at her like she was his whole world. While our daughter lay in a hospital bed, shivering with a high fever, he was there, holding another woman, smiling. In that moment, something inside me snapped completely. No more suspicion, no more hope, no more soft, enduring Elena. I knew, that night, a part of me had died. But at the very same moment, another part of me began to live. Ever since I saw that photo at the hotel, I was no longer the woman I used to be. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't throw things or curse him out. There were no tears left for a man who once knelt in the snow to propose to me, and now wrapped his arms around another woman in a luxury hotel while our daughter fought a high fever in the ER. What I felt wasn't pain. It was something colder and sharper, like a blade, clarity. I did the one thing I was best at. I gathered evidence. In silence, quietly, I contacted the bank, reviewed loan documents, pulled account statements, and printed every suspicious transaction. Every click of the mouse, every opened PDF file felt like a slice, peeling back the mask of the man I once trusted. I saved every photo, email, message, undeniable proof, not for revenge, but because I needed to preserve the last bit of respect I had for myself. After everything he had done, each night, after Nora fell asleep, I sat alone in front of the printer. The low hum of the machine was like the beat of a heart that had run out of emotion. I was no longer a betrayed wife. I was a mother, a woman, quietly preparing for a war to reclaim her dignity. Brian had no idea. He still came home on time. Still smiled. Still hugged our daughter. Still pretended to be the perfect husband. Maybe in his mind, I was still the same soft Elena, the one who would forgive him for the sake of the child. The family, the image. Maybe he still thought I didn't know. But in truth, I was only waiting for the moment he would destroy the carefully constructed image he had painted of himself. And that moment came sooner than I expected. One evening, Brian sat across from me in the living room. His face wore a seriousness I hadn't seen in a long time, the kind that only came when he needed me to agree to something important. A familiar performance. Elena, I need to have a serious conversation with you. I nodded, waiting. Inside, I had already prepared a filter to analyze every word, every blink, every angle of the story I knew he was about to spin. I have a huge investment opportunity, he began. A real estate project in the heart of River North, extremely promising. If we invest at the right time, we could double our assets in a year. His voice was calm, confident, even excited. He sounded like a professional, but all I could hear behind his words was greed out of control. I said nothing. And I need you to trust me. I need you to withdraw all our savings and take out an additional loan under your name. Just this once. Elena. I looked straight into his eyes. It wasn't a look of love anymore, but of someone studying a man who had sold out every inch of her trust. Who's investing with you? Brian hesitated. 1 second, but it was enough. I saw it. The pause wasn't guilt, it was calculation. Emma, she has strong industry connections. She understands the market. My heart turned cold, but I kept my composure. I already knew. I just needed to hear it from his own lips, to confirm that he couldn't even keep up the act anymore. Brian, this isn't a small amount. This is Nora's entire education fund. This is our emergency savings. This is everything I've worked for over the last decade. And you want me to drain all of it, to invest with her? I know, he said, but this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He said it as if I lacked vision. As if I was the obstacle. The outdated wife who didn't understand timing. But in reality, he, the man who sold his morals for a quick return, was the one who had lost sight of what truly mattered. I didn't yell. I didn't explode and throw accusations. I just stared at him for a long time, as if I were looking at a complete stranger. Because at that moment, the thing that hurt most wasn't my heart. It was my intellect. After that conversation, I thought things would calm down. But I was wrong. 3 days later, my mother-in-law showed up unannounced. She carried a bag of cinnamon rolls and a bottle of orange juice, on the surface. Just another visit to see her granddaughter. But I saw it instantly in her eyes. That softness she once had for me was gone. Elena, my mother-in-law began. Brian told me about it. This project is huge. Opportunities like this don't come twice in a lifetime. You should reconsider. You're someone who understands finance. You should see the potential. I didn't answer. I poured her a cup of tea, set it down in front of her, then sat across from her. My silence only made her more impatient. I know you're cautious, she continued, but a woman who's too calculating can hold her husband back. Brian is a man. He has ambition. You should be behind him, supporting him, not constantly doubting everything. I looked straight into her eyes. The same woman who once held me when I gave birth to Nora. Who once cried and held my hand when I miscarried. But now, she no longer saw me as her daughter. She saw me as an obstacle to the dream she had placed on her son's shoulders. I'm not doubting, I replied calmly. I just refuse to gamble my daughter's future on something I can't control. So you don't trust Brian? You don't trust your own husband? It's not about trust or distrust. It's that, I know exactly the kind of man he is. She stiffened for a moment. Then her voice rose, sharper and colder. Elena, you might be smart, but a woman shouldn't be smarter than her husband. If you live in this house and don't know how to help your husband grow, you'll become a burden sooner or later. A man like Brian can go far, but not with a wife who hoards money like it's locked in a safe. That was the moment I couldn't keep calm anymore. Not because she insulted me, but because she made everything I had sacrificed for years invisible. I had turned down promotions to stay home with Nora. I carried the financial burden when Brian's project failed. I smiled at my mother-in-law while silently screaming inside from loneliness. And now, I was being called a burden? Then came the final straw, at the family gathering. My mother-in-law organized one of her usual Sunday lunches. She called to remind me to dress nicely. Bring Nora, and pointedly added, Brian's new business partner will be joining us. A very promising young woman. I wasn't surprised. Nothing shocked me anymore. I simply nodded and prepared as usual. I chose a deep blue dress, elegant but strong. the color of calm, but not submission. I wore light makeup and pinned my hair neatly. I didn't go there to beg or protect anyone's reputation. I went there as someone who already knew what scene was about to unfold, and who would be the one to shatter the illusion. When Emma walked in, arm in arm with Brian like a proper couple, it was as if something exploded inside me. She didn't avoid my eyes. In fact, she smiled faintly, like a challenge. The smile of a woman who believed the man beside her was already hers. During the meal, Brian stood up, holding a wine glass, his eyes gleaming as if he was about to deliver a TED Talk. "Everyone," he announced, "today's the perfect time to share a major opportunity. Emma and I have just landed a real estate project in River North, something truly special." My mother-in-law nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling, as if she saw her younger self in Emma. "Emma is very business savvy," she said proudly. "She's dynamic, understands the market, and knows how to build connections. With her and Brian working together, the future is bright." I felt cold, not from anger, but from how blatantly everything was laid bare now. They didn't know it, but I knew. This was the end. Brian turned to me and said loudly, making sure the room heard, "Elena, I think you should reconsider. You need to trust me. This is the time we need each other the most." He played the part of a man pleading for trust, when in reality, he was just trying to corner me again. But he forgot. I was no longer the Elena who feared losing him. I placed my glass down. Not rushed, not shaking. "No, I've thought it through. I won't invest a single cent into this so-called project." The room fell silent. My sister-in-law dropped her fork onto her plate, creating a sharp clink that sliced through the still air. My mother-in-law glared at me, her voice rising in the same biting tone she used whenever someone defied her. "You ungrateful girl, you don't understand anything. What kind of wife are you if you won't support your husband? Do you think being in this family means just holding your child and sitting pretty?" I stood up slowly. No yelling, no raised voice. I opened my purse and pulled out neatly clipped stacks of paper, arranged in order. "I'm not refusing to help because I don't understand. I'm refusing because I know exactly what my husband is doing with his so-called partner." I spread the documents across the table. A copy of the loan contract signed in my name, with a forged signature. The apartment deed where Emma currently lived. A photo of my SUV parked at the hotel. And the final image, Brian and Emma, wrapped in each other's arms at a 5-star hotel. On the same night our daughter was in the emergency room with a 104-degree fever. No one spoke. Even my mother-in-law, who always had a rebuttal for everything, was stunned into silence. I looked around the room. My voice calm, unwavering, but every word cut like a blade. Everything he used to win her over was my money, my name, my naivety, and everyone here, instead of asking him why he did it, is blaming me for not supporting my husband. I expected silence to follow that sentence. But no, the one who broke the silence was Brian himself. He let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Honestly, I should thank you, Elena. Thanks to you, I now know what it's like to be spied on in my own home. You're not a wife, you're an auditor for my life." I didn't respond, but my eyes never left his. The eyes of a man cracking because he knew the game was over. Brian continued, louder now, bolder, shameless. "If you want to live your life counting every penny, suffocating in caution, go ahead, but don't cage me in that prison you built. I need a woman with vision. Someone who takes risks, not someone obsessed with a savings ledger." I looked at Emma. She was clutching Brian's sleeve, clearly unsettled, but still trying to maintain composure. "If that's the woman you want," I said quietly, "then go. But from now on, don't use my name for any of your risks ever again." I took Nora's hand. She had been sitting quietly the whole time. Sensing something was shifting, I leaned down and whispered, "Let's go home, sweetheart." I turned and walked away. And in the eyes of everyone left behind, I didn't see victory or shame. I saw people who had just lost the most valuable thing they never even realized they had. The trust of someone who once loved them with her whole being. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel defeated. I felt free. I left that family dinner like someone walking out of a courtroom. No judge required. In front of people I once called family. I removed their masks, and my own. I was no longer the silent Elena. No longer the woman who cried behind closed doors. I was someone who spoke the truth. And accepted what came after. That night, I didn't go home. I called Alyssa, my best friend from college. She opened the door before I could even knock. I didn't need to say a word. Just seeing the worry in her eyes was enough for the tears to come. Not from weakness, but because I knew, this time, I wasn't going back. Nora and I stayed with Alyssa for 2 nights. I didn't sleep at all. I reviewed every document, categorized every piece of evidence, backed up data in 3 separate places. Each folder was labeled and ordered by date. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman preparing to reclaim justice, for herself. And her daughter. On Monday morning, I walked into a law office. A bright, cold room filled with the sharp smell of freshly printed paper. I sat across from a gray-haired man whose eyes were both professional and kind. "I want a divorce," I said. My voice didn't shake. "And I want to sue my husband for forgery, identity theft, and misappropriation of funds." Within the first week, the court issued an emergency freeze on assets. The apartment registered under my name, where Emma had been living, was sealed off. The SUV Brian had been driving, still under my installment plan, was repossessed. The secret bank account he had used to siphon our joint savings was frozen. Pending investigation. For the first time, Brian was being held accountable, no longer shielded by charm and smooth talk. His reaction was exactly as I expected. He didn't apologize. He didn't admit fault. Instead, he launched a smear campaign. He sent emails to friends, family, even my coworkers, claiming I was obsessively controlling. That I never understood him, and that I used our daughter to manipulate emotions. I didn't respond. I let the evidence speak. My lawyer issued subpoenas to banks, real estate agents, and everyone Brian had done business with. Numbers don't lie. They drew a roadmap of guilt clearer than any words I could say. The first court hearing happened a month later. I entered the courtroom in a light gray suit, hair neatly tied, eyes steady. Brian was there, too, accompanied by Emma and a young lawyer dressed like she was ready for prime time. He looked at me and gave that familiar smirk, the one that used to melt me. Now, it made me sick. During the hearing, their side tried hard to paint me as the financially rigid wife who emotionally pressured her husband. They showed old emails and text messages where I reminded Brian about overspending. They tried to frame me as a suffocating control freak. I let them talk. Then, it was my turn. I presented 3 things. A copy of the forged loan agreement with my falsified signature. Bank statements clearly showing unauthorized fund transfers. And the photo of Brian and Emma, embracing each other in a 5-star hotel on the very night our daughter was in the hospital. Brian was speechless. Even his attorney looked at him with a flicker of confusion. But Brian didn't back down. He stood up, turned toward me, and spoke loudly before the entire courtroom. "You think you're the only one who's hurt? I suffered too. Living with someone who never trusted me, who never loved me the right way. You were always about numbers, about plans, about warnings. I just wanted to live, to breathe. And Emma, she gave me that." I didn't shed a tear. I simply looked him straight in the eye and replied, "If you needed someone to breathe with, then don't use my name to take out loans. Don't use the assets I own to finance your freedom. And don't abandon your daughter in a hospital to go chasing a feeling. That's not living. That's running away." The entire courtroom fell silent. The judge called for order. I knew in that moment, I had won. Not just legally, but with my dignity intact. But the cost was high. I lost the peace I once had. I lost the family in name. I lost the relationship with my in-laws, who hadn't spoken a word to me since that dinner. My mother-in-law sent just one message. "Do you think this is really what's best for Nora?" I didn't reply, because by then, I no longer needed validation from those who chose silence when the truth came out. I thought things would settle after the first hearing, but Brian changed tactics. He began harassing me. Every morning, he waited outside the apartment I had just rented, watching me and Nora leave. Once, he even came to my workplace. pretending to be a client just to force an encounter. He sent flowers, then letters, then, when I gave no response, threatening messages. One morning, I opened my car door to find a folded note on the driver's seat. "You may have won the first round, but don't think you'll have it all." I reported him to the police. I changed my number, installed security cameras, recorded every call, saved every piece of evidence. I refused to be a victim again. I rented a small apartment, just enough for the two of us. Each morning, I took Nora to school. Then I returned to my desk, not as anyone's chief accountant anymore, but as an independent financial consultant. I started working with women preparing for divorce. I helped them audit assets, plan for financial independence, and rebuild their lives. I wasn't just working, I was healing. One client once asked me, "You've been through this yourself, haven't you? Is that how you understand so well?" I smiled. I used to be someone who didn't even know she had signed a loan for $240. Now, I know exactly what I'm signing. I'm not fully healed. There are nights I still wake up from bad dreams. Sometimes, Brian's eyes haunt me in my sleep. But I no longer collapse. I'm no longer afraid. And most importantly, I'm no longer alone, because I've chosen to stand by myself. The divorce was finalized 5 months later. I was granted full custody of Nora and retained all legal assets in my name. Brian was ordered to repay the joint debts. He didn't leave the courthouse with a smug smile this time. He walked out with his head bowed. But I didn't need his regret. I only needed justice. And I got it, with both clarity and courage. There's something no one tells you about surviving a life storm. Peace doesn't return like sunlight piercing through rain. It arrives quietly, like a soft morning ray slipping through the blinds. Like the sound of Nora laughing as she colors. Like the morning I opened my eyes and realized, I no longer had to pretend to be okay. I was okay. I no longer count time in days or weeks. I count it in milestones. The first time I slept through the night. The first time I wore that old dress Brian once called, not classy enough. The first time I took Nora on a solo day trip, and we laughed the entire afternoon. I didn't go back to being the old Elena. I didn't want to. That woman had sacrificed too much for a family that no longer existed. I became a new version of myself, not perfect, but stronger. I learned to say, no. I learned to protect what's mine. And I learned this: no love is worth keeping if it demands you abandon yourself. When the second hearing ended, I was officially granted full custody of Nora. But beyond the legal victory, I knew I had given my daughter something more important. A safe environment, where neither of us lived in fear. I taught her that love does not come with lies. That silence in the face of injustice is not kindness, it's complicity. And that women, no matter their past, always have the right to choose themselves again. I started writing. At first, just journal entries. Then, I shared a piece of my story on a small forum for single mothers. I didn't expect much, but the post went viral. Hundreds of messages poured in, not just words of encouragement, but stories from other women still living in silence, in pain, and in fear, just like I once had. I decided to start a blog, where I wrote about personal finance management, healing after divorce, budgeting, tracing money flow in a household, and most importantly, how to listen to your inner voice. I realized, when a woman truly understands what she owns, she becomes far less vulnerable to manipulation, no matter how sweet the promises, how charming the smiles, or how convincing the performance called the ideal husband. Later, a journalist reached out to me, proposing an interview and a feature series based on my story. I agreed, not to seek sympathy, but to highlight one truth. Freedom doesn't come from leaving someone. It comes from returning to yourself, and standing on your own side. I met more women, from grocery clerks to high-powered businesswomen. They all shared the same fear. If I leave, I'll lose everything. I always told them, no, you're not losing everything. You're reclaiming the rest of your life. Brian no longer contacts me. After being officially warned for harassment and threats, he faded into silence. I don't know how he's living now, and I no longer care. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I no longer give someone the power to hurt me again. One late autumn day, Nora asked me, "Mom, are you sad that Dad's not here anymore?" I held her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "I'm sad that your dad didn't make the right choice. But I'm not sad that we did. I know this journey isn't over. But now, I walk with my head held high. I walk with my daughter's hand in mine. And in my heart, there is no more pain, only a quiet, unwavering belief. Women don't need to be rescued. They just need no one standing in their way when they decide to rescue themselves."